Welcome to Conversations With. My name is Shaley Hoogendoorn, and I live with Bipolar II disorder. Sharing with others is healing, both individually and collectively. Sharing our stories will educate others, bring more understanding, shed more light, and smash more stigma. Our voices need to be heard. Our stories aren't over yet. This is Bipolar. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of This is Bipolar. If you don't already know, I am Shaley Hoogendoorn. I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a school teacher, and a mental health advocate. I also live with Bipolar II disorder. Before we get started on this amazing episode that I'm very excited about, I want to let you know that if you want to go deeper and connect with other folks that live with bipolar disorder, I have subscriptions on Instagram. Maybe you're saying to yourself, what even is that? Basically, it's a place where you can subscribe and you get certain things. And those things look like a chat. So we have a personal chat with all the people that are in the group. They all live with bipolar disorder, and we give peer support, or it's just a place to feel completely understood and seen, and places we sometimes share our tips and tricks. And it's not a professional space, but it is a peer support space. And the second thing we do is have a Zoom meeting every month. And it is one of my favorite days of the month because we just get there and I can feel like my shoulders relax as I see people that I know and trust. And there are always new people coming in every time, so you won't be alone. And some people don't share anything the first time, they just hang out, and some people do. So it's a really great way to go deeper. And there are some other perks too that you will get when you subscribe, $6.99 US a month, and I would love to see you there. I would love right now to get my friend and fellow advocate and just a funny, hilarious person to introduce herself. I'm really excited for you to hear more about Andrea. And if you don't know her full story, we have done episodes before. So we have her whole story, and then we have a Going Deeper episode where she talks specifically about self-stigma. And you're going to see a lot of her because Andrea's going to co-host for a while. We've really connected. And so I'm really glad to have Andrea here. Andrea, tell us about you.
I am so happy to be here, Shaley. This whole community loves you so much. I love you so much. By the way, just a note on your subscriptions. I think something really special about it is that, first of all, it's not like you've got the chat, so it's not time specific. You don't have to show up at a certain time to connect with someone. That's really powerful. And because it's on Instagram, there's a certain degree of anonymity, right? So if you're dealing with some shame or self-stigma, you're not totally ready to be present and own your diagnosis, this is also a safe space for you. So that's really cool. Just want to say that. So yes.
Thank you.
My name's Andrea Vassilev. I am a mental health advocate. I'm a registered psychological associate, which is a pre-licensure psychologist. I have lived with bipolar disorder for over 26 years now. I write, I speak, I advocate, I research. So I do academic, clinical research, and lived experience work. And that's my jam. New friends ask me, what do you do for fun? And I'm like, I work and advocate for bipolar. That's what I do for fun. My handle is best.life.bipolar. So come join my community too.
Yes.
And yeah, delighted to be here with you.
Yes. And she fosters cats.
I do. There's one at the door, actually.
That's hilarious. I love that so much. So I get cat pictures and it makes me so happy. You can tell what kind of person Andrea is. She fosters cats, friends. That's pretty awesome. Today, we wanted to talk about something super important and something that the community always has a huge response for. So we wanted to talk about the early warning signs and just the signs and symptoms of depression. And Andrea, if you wanted to share the diagnostic criteria for depression, just for our friends that aren't sure if they're just sad or if they actually are dealing with a mental health disorder. There's one of the kitty cats. If you're listening, there is a cat ear and tail that we can see.
Check out the video version. So yes, there are so the doctors can all speak the same language. There are specific diagnostic criteria that people use for having what we call a major depressive disorder, right? Even if you don't meet all the quote unquote requirements to be diagnosed with an episode, right? Major depressive episode, that doesn't mean that your symptoms aren't valid, and it does not mean that you don't deserve and should get help, right?
Yes.
Just so we all have the same starting point, right? To have a major depressive episode, you have to have 5 or more of the following criteria for 2 weeks, right? And one of these must be either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So the first one is depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. And that can be either you're feeling it or someone's noticing it in you. So it can be internal or external, right? The second one is marked diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities. So basically that looks like, usually I love to dance and dancing sounds dumb. I'm not interested. I don't want to do it. It's not giving me any pleasure, right? So we got to have one of these two. And then of the other ones, we have things like weight change. So it's weight loss or weight gain. We've got sleep change, which is insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day, right? So just note, people think, oh, I get depressed and I gain weight. You can also lose weight. You can also sleep less. You can sleep more. So weight change, sleep change. This one's a little interesting. Psychomotor agitation or retardation nearly every day. That means something that's observable to others. You're moving through the world, through space, either in an agitated way or in a slowed down way.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Number 6 is fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. So I think we're all familiar with that kind of molasses feeling, right?
Yeah.
7, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt nearly every day, right?
Yeah.
And it makes the distinction that this isn't just self-reproach or guilt about being sick. It's not just, gee, I feel so bad, I'm sick. It's, oh my gosh, I'm a burden to everybody. I'm so useless in this world. Everybody hates me. That kind of thing. These really extreme feelings. I feel like I'm talking to people and they're not like you. They're nodding their heads like, oh yeah, I get that. I've been there. Number 8 is diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day, right? And the last one, which we're going to spend a minute on, is recurrent thoughts of death or recurrent suicidal ideation. Now, Shaley, you mentioned this before. You were saying all suicidality matters, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. So some people think, I just want to go to sleep and never wake up. That's a form of passive suicidal ideation. You should tell your doctor about that. You should talk to someone about that. You should ask for help. Everything from that to having, when we screen for suicidality, we go through ideation, plan. Do you have intent? Do you have means? Do you have access to those means? Do you have a timeline? And these are all increasing levels of severity. But just know wherever you are in that, if you are thinking about death in a positive way, that's something you need to talk about with someone. Please, I beg of you.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are afraid to talk about that because there's an added stigma, or they're afraid that they might end up in the hospital. But I am telling you right now, we would rather you have to go somewhere like the hospital because we want you to still be around. Also, that's really extreme, like you said, passive or active. And so I just wanted to say that because I know people can be so afraid, but I just think, it's really just, you deserve love and help if you are having any type of these feelings or thoughts.
Right. And there's a lot of things your doctor or therapist may help you with before that, like safety planning, right? Where you come up with coping mechanisms, you contract first aid. There's a lot that can be done. They're not just going to throw you in the hospital. So
exactly,
it matters. That's our bottom line here in this part of the podcast.
Exactly. One of the things I wanted to do, now that we understand all those things, and you need how many of those symptoms? Is something like?
You need 5 of 9, but one of them must be depressed mood or marked diminished interest or pleasure. And it's got to be most of the day, nearly every day for 2 weeks. So that's kind of like a big box to fill, right? I definitely had depressive symptoms that did not meet all those requirements, but they were, as you mentioned, warning signs.
Yes. And that's what I want to talk about. I think that it's really powerful. We have really different experiences. If you go back and listen to Andrea, she was diagnosed as a teenager. I was diagnosed when I was 32. And yet I did have depression for sure. And I hit most of those markers. in high school. And so I'd love to hear from you, Andrea. What do you notice, or what do you know are your early warning signs of a depressive episode? I'd love to hear.
I think for me, I think for a lot of people, the biggest one is going to be sadness, because sadness hits you over the head. It's hard to ignore. You might be able to ignore changes in weight, changes in sleep, right? Things like that. But it's very hard to ignore sadness. So that's a big one. But my other warning signs, I thought about this, are first of all, disinterest. I'm passionate. I love everything that I do. And when I start not to be interested, not to care, that's the second thing that we talked about on this list here. That's a big warning sign. Like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to send that email. I don't want to write that article. That's a flag for me. Following that, we get withdrawal. I get withdrawal, right? I actually have one friend who I talk to almost every day. And once I went 48 hours without talking to her. And she texted my husband and said, "Where is Andrea? Is she okay?" So I withdraw socially, right? That's a warning sign. And for me, I think the other big one is fatigue. Just being tired, not wanting to get out of bed. The bed is so comfy, you don't want to do it. Everything just drains you.
Yeah.
What about you? Are those some of yours too, or you got different ones?
Yeah, no, for sure. So just the sadness, and then I just feel like there's nothing to look forward to, and I just feel in my body just like this heaviness. Like you said before, that molasses feeling, that everything just seems like a slog. Things that come natural to me, my baseline is quite high. So sometimes it's hard to see if I'm depressed because it doesn't look like maybe what it is on TV, etc. I can still get out of bed and do the things I have to do, but just what I have to do, pick up the kids, do if I have to go to work. But I also have this feeling of dread about everything, like you said, not looking forward to, but I also feel like I just want to get it over with. And so I still do the things, but I'm like, oh, I can't wait till it's done. And one of the things I do too is I immerse myself in books, in TV, anything to not have to think, anything to be like in other people's experiences and not my own. And one of the things I remember it was one of my saddest points. I remember we were driving around. I remember I was, and not creepily, I'm just gazing. I'm not like full on stalking folks, but I'm like looking in windows, and when you just see maybe someone's washing the dishes, I just would always wonder if they feel sad. I wonder if making their dinner is as hard for me. And that's a big thing for me too. The things, like regular things that just come so easily at other times, like making meals. Oh my gosh, that just seems so overwhelming. Doing the regular things.
Everything's harder.
It is. It is.
Everything's harder.
Yeah. And I used to think that it was only sadness, but I don't know about you, but do you experience like irritability?
So interesting. You know how I read out these diagnostic criteria, the first one where it talks about depressed mood, there's a note, really important, in children and adolescents, this can also be irritable. Now, I don't know why it's limited to children and adolescents in the diagnostic criteria, whatever, I didn't write the book, but irritability is a really common depressive symptom. And I think it's confusing because it can also be a symptom of mood elevation, right?
Yep.
So it's like, okay, where are we on this spectrum here? What's happening? So I do get irritable. It's not one of my most noticeable symptoms, although maybe my husband would disagree with that. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually, Shaley. So what would your partner say? Sometimes the report we have internally is different from the data we get externally.
Yeah. So I used to think that I covered it up pretty well. I don't have a filter, so I talk about everything. So he doesn't have to ask, I will be talking about it. But I think that I didn't recognize probably until I was diagnosed the irritability. And for me, that just looks like negativity. And he has brought that up. I think like I'm more sad or hopeless, but everything bugs me. I'm negative. I'm negative about everything, even when we're driving, and I'm always commenting on it because he's always, hey, you're bringing down the space, right? Like at dinner time, we'll talk about our days, and I just talk about everything that's
Yeah.
wrong. I'll even get into things that there's a lot of social justice issues that I care about. I go from I'm having a bad day or someone said something and it hurt my feelings to like we set this world on fire, like what our children, we have left this world burning world for our
Mm.
children. I'm like into, we've just global warming and just all the
Right.
things that like zero to that and
Yes,
all
that
the in
fast
between.
escalation. And that's why we wanted to do this episode, right? Because you get warning signs, but if you don't note them and do something about it, whether that something is seeing your therapist, changing your medication, regulating your sleep and your social rhythms, whatever it is, you got to do something before they go, like you said, 0 to
Yeah.
100 really fast. But
Yeah.
like you said, it makes a lot of sense. It's like we have on these like lenses, these they say, see the world through rose-colored glasses. I feel like when you're experiencing depression,
Yeah.
you're experiencing the world through like very dark colored lenses, like gray colored lenses.
Yeah. I heard someone say on a different podcast how depression makes their world small, almost like you see the world like through a negative, like a pinhole, almost like it's
Mhm.
you have blinders on, like those horse like kind of blinders, and it just becomes so small because you have these repetitive thoughts. And I feel like they just pummel me. Tell me the lies that your brain tells you when you're depressed, and then I'll tell you mine.
Okay, so that's interesting because you were saying your husband says you're irritable, right?
Yep.
In preparation for this episode, I asked my husband what my warning signs were that he would notice, and they were totally different from what I said.
Wow.
That was fascinating. He said that I talk less as soon as
Ah.
he's actually asked me this before. You're not talking a lot. Are you okay? What's the matter? He said that generally I emit a lot of words, and that when I stop emitting words, that something is probably wrong.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Does
Yeah.
that resonate with you?
Yes.
100%.
Oh my
100%.
goodness. Yeah.
So, and to answer your initial question, the other thing he mentioned is that I tend to apologize a lot and feel really bad about myself. So that kind of speaks to what you're asking, that I'm sorry this, I'm sorry that, I'm sorry I'm such a burden, I'm sorry I'm such a bad wife, just all
Yeah.
of the things, it's all my fault. And one of the diagnostic criteria is feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. So
Yeah.
you're seeing some of these symptoms can be warning signs, but there's also other warning signs that maybe are not listed as symptoms.
Yeah. My brain is so nasty when I'm
Mhm.
depressed. I think like you, like I apologize for everything. Or if I'm asking for something, I'll be like, if it's okay with you, if not,
Ah,
no worries. Like I add all these
the
extra.
hedging.
Yes. Okay. That's the word for it. I do that. And then I apologize. I do think I'm a burden. One of my big things is like I'm going to ruin my children. They're going to just have this really sad outlook on life. And so then maybe it would be easier if I just went away. Right. And I don't mean went away, go away in suicidal ideation thought kind of way, like moving for a while or oh, I just think, and then I just get, oh, I feel so bad. This is their lot in life to have a mother. And then I go wild with thoughts about they're going to need therapy and be talking about me. And I know that's not true. And I know that I'm not a terrible mom and terrible wife. I just think that I'm such a burden. I do like to talk to people, like I talk a lot, but I feel like you in that I get quieter because I feel like it's the same thing because they're
Mm.
the same thoughts and because they come back. And I have this reoccurring thought like, you're a mental health advocate. Shouldn't you be farther along by now? How did you get here again? It is a chronic illness. I am going to come back again. I am going to have
Right.
these exact same thoughts. And it's not my fault when I feel like
Right.
everything's my fault.
And my dear, can I just remind you that the reason you are such a successful mental health advocate is because you show up when you're feeling not so great.
Mm.
Right? That's what people, that's what we love about you, is that you're vulnerable and you're authentic. So when you think, I'm a mental health advocate, why am I feeling this way? Maybe I'm a mental health advocate because I'm honest about when I'm feeling this way. Like,
Right? I used to think that I'll just come on here and I'll be like a helpful resource, but I swore to myself and I made a promise to myself, and Julie and I both talked about it, that we weren't showing up on the podcast to give silver linings or platitudes, and
Right.
that I call it the messy middle because that was what I was
Mm.
missing. I would hear from people when they'd come out of something, or if they would think, which we know is not true, they were cured. Those stories were everywhere, but I wanted to hear stories of I'm slogging through and then things changed and now I'm slogging through again.
Exactly. That is how it works. Yeah.
How do you experience it in your body? And I mean with sleep and eating, because I know that people experience it in different ways.
Definitely. I get more sleepy. I just want to be in bed. I have low energy. I also, when I first was diagnosed, the first symptoms that I had were somatic symptoms. So I had really bad stomach aches and I had no appetite. And so my mother, when I was 14, took me, some people may have heard this story, but took me to the pediatrician, got all my stomach labs and tests and whatever done. And the doctor said, you need to take her to the psychiatrist. This is not, her stomach's fine. Right. But I had stopped eating. So anyway, that still happens sometimes. But on the flip side, also sometimes I crave carbs. And this happens to a lot of people actually, right? Your body craves carbs because it helps in the production of certain neurotransmitters and it just makes you feel good. So when I find myself having pasta for dinner for, I don't know, 6 nights in a row, then I'm thinking something might be up. But also note, I have a friend who has pasta every night for dinner, even when she's not experiencing depression. So
Yeah.
know that any warning signs or symptoms are always off of baseline. So it's important to work with the therapist, doctor, and learn what your baseline is. So when
Yeah.
you from your baseline, you're aware of that.
Yeah. Especially important to know that because one of my things is I start comparing myself to everybody
Oh,
else.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter. You have to just compare yourself to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's so important to know. I feel it in my body. I gain weight. And because those of you that listened before, my bipolar disorder would show up very cyclical before I had treatment and before my diagnosis. And so every winter I could gain anywhere up from 5 to 10 pounds. And my very worst depression, it was like in a month or 6 weeks, I gained 25 pounds because I was binge eating.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't just be like now when I overeat a little bit because something's delicious or it's Christmas or whatever. It would be these thoughts in my head, you're going to feel better. You need to do this. Like immediately, there was this sense of urgency. I remember going to the store, or I remember I was doing my teaching practicum and I remember thinking about the stores I could stop at on the bus ride home, and it would be like all junk food. But then the next day I would completely restrict and I would over exercise and then do it again. And it was terrible cycle. And I couldn't really hide it from my husband, but it was like a really embarrassing. And I felt I had no self control and I just felt like the biggest loser. I usually would stick to plans when I'm depressed because I would just knew that instinctively that would make me worse because I'm
Very
such
good.
an extrovert.
Yeah.
But I would try and change plans. Like I wouldn't go if people invited us for dinner or that kind of thing because I couldn't control it. So
And I
that was
think,
the big one.
yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up because in treating bipolar, I treat bipolar, it almost never shows up alone, right? So people might be feeling extra shame that they have another mental health condition or diagnosis. That is the norm. It so rarely shows up
Yeah.
by itself, right? So you might see the worsening of other symptoms too. So like you mentioned, some eating stuff, right? If you've got a pattern in your past of some sort of eating stuff, I don't want to say disordered eating because that might not feel good, but some sort of eating stuff, right?
Yep.
Patterns of eating that don't serve you, you might see some of that flare up as a warning sign. When I experience depression, really bad depression, this can also be a warning sign. Sometimes I get OCD tendencies, right? It wouldn't
Okay.
qualify as an OCD diagnosis, but I get those kinds of tendencies, those repetitive obsessive thoughts, right? So if you have another diagnosis, you might be on the lookout for some of that flaring up too.
Yeah. My whole thought life was consumed by food.
Mm,
And it's like I needed to control something. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any other lies that my brain tells me. It's that one of the big ones too is that it's never going to get better. And I start to dissect and only see the hard things in my relationships, like in my marriage or this. I'm like, I look at other couples, I'm like, we should be this, or we should be doing more. Like I should all over.
Now we're in the
myself.
land of cognitive distortions, which people are more prone to when they're depressive. You can have that awareness of, like you just so beautifully demonstrated, of I am having distorted thinking right now, right? That may be a warning sign of depression. So we've got a bunch of them now. Disinterest, withdrawal, fatigue, irritability, talking less, canceling plans,
Yeah.
gaining weight, less energy, right? And the reason we did this episode is so people can have awareness of warning signs before they snowball. Be aware of the snowball because it happens so fast.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about things that help or some things we've done that have hurt it. So we're going to get into that. So if you feel like, okay, get on with, I want to know what to do, you're going to want to hold out.
Have to come back.
I wanted to come back to this idea of this spectrum of suicidality. I wanted to just acknowledge I would immediately back then would have been like, no, 100%. I've never had that. I don't even know, what you're talking about, because I only saw it in one way. Like you had a plan, right? You had a plan and you wanted to die. And I never had that. However, I would think that I want to go to sleep for a very long time, or I
Exactly.
don't want to exist unless I can feel better. But I never thought of it as a death thing. I would think about going to live like in the woods. Okay, y'all, I am not, I'll go for like short hikes, etc., but I'm not a woodsy person. Why would I go live in the woods?
You live in Canada, don't you live in the woods? No, just
Yeah, yeah, totally. And the funny thing is my parents live like out of town on big acreage. That's where I grew up. But I think I crave that in very small doses. But
Right.
I would not like seclusion sounds horrible to me.
Yes.
And no one to talk to sounds
Neither of us
horrible.
would last very long in seclusion. We'd be on the WhatsApp before you know it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And yeah, that's a clue that it's getting worse, right? When I start to think that. And I think I didn't share a lot of those
Mhm.
thoughts because I didn't think that they were bad enough.
Yeah, and it's so important to share those thoughts. And it sounds like you were aware that you didn't want to die, but you didn't want to be in pain. And that's honestly how most suicides happen. People don't want to die. People just don't want to be in pain, which is why any thoughts of death or dying are so important
Yeah.
to address. In the US, in Canada, we have 988 for an emergency hotline. It's always better to call than to not call. I know people have had some objections to how 988 is being run, but ultimately your life is worth saving. But even if you just want to talk to your therapist first about, I'm having feelings of not wanting to be alive, they will know how to deal with that. So we have basically what you're referring to, I think, is like passive ideation, which is like
Yeah.
just wanting to cease to exist, and active ideation, which is here's how I'm going to hurt myself. Here's what I'm going to use to hurt myself. Here's when I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
All are very important.
Exactly. If the thought of not existing comforts you, then you need to talk to someone,
You
please.
need to ask for help and keep asking for help until someone gives you help. A friend, a neighbor, a therapist, anybody, keep asking for help until someone
Yeah.
gives you that help. In the US, we have a crisis text line, 741-741.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's helpful because
You
you
don't have to
have
speak, you
feelings.
just text.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially
so that's
nowadays.
good.
Who uses a phone?
Yeah. I'm old. I'm old. I talk on the phone. What can I say?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Sometimes it's just easier. Or I do as you talk to text, but then I don't reread it and I end up sending a really ridiculous. And as Andrea was saying, the 988 and the text number, there is also on the International Bipolar Foundation, they have a list of all the hotlines. And we
Internationally.
internet, yeah, and we will put those in the show notes. We'll have it in the show notes in case you need it. And I know it might feel weird or awkward to talk to a stranger, but sometimes for people, that's the best way to start, because sometimes it's the hardest to tell the people we love is we don't want to
Want to
scare them
disappoint them.
and disappoint them,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for talking about that. I just think it's
Sure.
really important. It was such a aha moment for me, and it was just freeing that knowing there was like a spectrum, right? Because
Yeah.
it was scary, right? And I think it prevented me from getting help and prevented me when I talked to people from getting a diagnosis earlier, because I would downplay a lot of things, right?
Sure.
And because I always thought it's not enough. It's, oh, this eating things that I have, it's not enough because it's not terrible enough to be called a disorder. But if I look at it, it took over my entire life. It was clearly
Right.
disordered eating, right? And I was very comforted when I finally saw someone, a therapist that understood bipolar disorder and said, "Oh, that's common." And I was like, "Oh my
Yep.
goodness," because I only had it when I was depressed. So I wouldn't have it all year long. So I wouldn't get a
Right.
diagnosis. So I'm like, and I had this weird thought. Oh my goodness. I can't even believe I'm
Tell
saying
me, what's your weird thought?
my weird thought was always like that sometimes I wish things would have been worse so that people could have helped me. I would think, oh, I would never, I always thought, oh, it's not bad enough. Like the suffering Olympics, right? Like it's not bad enough. There are people worse off, right? That was in my family something that came up a lot, right? Oh, there's people worse off. And so I didn't want to take up the space for people that were like struggling more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's not a competition.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk about next, because I know this is huge that people talk about on the internet or when I meet up with folks in our groups and stuff, but we talk about how it affects relationships, because I know it has deeply affected some of mine, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Friendships, romantic relationships, whatever you have experienced.
I almost feel like we could do a whole episode on this.
Yeah. Okay, we will, people. We're just going to touch on it now, but we will.
It can impact relationships, and people presume that means making them worse. But also, when you experience tough stuff with somebody you love, it brings you closer together. So
Interesting.
it's not going to be just all bad stuff, right? It's hard. It can be really hard to be in a relationship when you have bipolar, or in a relationship with someone else who has bipolar. But think about sort of the level of closeness that you get with those people who truly care about you and truly have seen you at your most vulnerable.
Yeah, it's true. I think I think I can go both ways. I think the hardest thing for me is that the people that I'm closest to, like my mom and my husband, I just some of the things that I said or how I treated them, or I just I still struggle with the guilt about that, and trying to understand that it was more of my illness than it's not. I'm always trying to figure out, I was like, that's not my heart.
I wasn't able to be my authentic self at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt so bad that it was like to people that I care about most. And I think sometimes it gets really hard on my family because they don't know what to do for me, because they want to help and fix things. But because I'm negative, if they say anything super cheesy and sunny,
Right?
then
Toxic positivity.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And yeah, I wanted to mention something, and I read this somewhere, and I've completely thought of it as my own now. This thought,
Yeah.
it talked about the extra guilt of the not getting outside. I have this thing. I feel like the sun is judgy when I'm depressed. I
The
feel
sun is judgy.
Yes, I feel
Really
like
one.
the sun, like I want to almost close the curtains, and I want it to my environment to feel how I'm feeling when I'm
Mm,
depressed, which makes it worse. But I feel like it's taunting me, like you should be outside. You should go and enjoy it. Or I get this feeling like, because it rains here a lot, oh, maybe that's I'm wasting the last of a sunny day in a long time. So I noticed one of my things is I close the blinds more and I keep it dark more in my house.
Yeah, we can, I think that's something that makes a lot of sense to me. I think we can talk about that when we talk about like how to cope,
Yeah,
right?
we
Because
totally can.
noticing that's a symptom can be really empowering, knowing like, oh, but this is not my average behavior. This is not my everyday behavior. This is different. This is a symptom.
Yeah. And
Right?
just for if you're listening or you wanted to share with a friend that loves you that doesn't understand or live with bipolar disorder, I think I withdraw from certain friendships. And I notice that the friendships that I withdraw from are folks that try to fix things or are folks that I know they're well meaning. I know they have good hearts, but they will say things like, well, just let's make plans to get you out next week. Or if they say things like that, I feel 1,000 times worse when they're trying to help. So just so you know, being listening, validating, and just being there is better because your people are
Yes.
gonna withdraw from you.
Yeah. And it's important that when you're feeling not experiencing depression or experiencing any mood elevation, to have talks with your friends and people who love you. We can do a whole thing on relationships. I'm gonna stop talking now because let's save it for
Yeah. Dun, 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 to be
dun dun dun.
continued.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that's a really important one. So I've noticed, and I noticed too, there hasn't been very many. And I think they were just like, there's friendships for a reason, a season, a lifetime. They were definitely a season, but I know that I walked away from a few friendships. And I wonder if it could have been different if I was honest.
Maybe, but you
Yeah.
did the best you could with the information you had at the time, right?
Yeah. And I felt like sometimes when you're with folks that aren't as aware or emotionally literate or aware, because that's one thing with us that is great once we understand ourselves. We actually are, yeah. And I'm definitely drawn to darker things. Like I know one of my warning signs is if I'm like watching or reading a lot more true crime.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So I go the opposite. If I'm more sensitive, I'm a crier and as you know, I have a weakness for animals. So if you see those like sad ASPCA commercials,
Oh,
I lose it. I normally lose it, right? But
yeah.
I can't even, if I see like a stray cat on the street and I lose it more than usual, like that's a warning sign, just being hypersensitive to the things that I'm usually sensitive to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took me a long time to realize that one of the things I want to do, which is the exact opposite of what I should do, which I'll tell you about in the next episode too.
You use the
Um,
word should a lot.
I know I should all over myself. But I lean towards the external, like I want my environment, the things I'm listening to, the things I'm doing to feel like how I feel inside, which is
Okay.
not helpful. Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
that's the depression taking over. When
Exactly.
I was first diagnosed, they bought me this book. We put it in the show notes, what it's called. I got to go downstairs and find it.
Okay.
But it's basically like depression is a black dog. I think it was from the Black
Mm.
Dog Institute in Australia. I can't remember. And it's a cartoon book, so it was suitable for me as a 14-year-old. With
Yeah.
depression being like a black dog that follows you around. So like you were saying, you want your internal to match your external. That's the black dog trying to arrange stuff to be in line with him.
Oh my goodness, what a good way to explain to kiddos.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I just think, yeah, deeply affects my relationships. But it's true in the internet relationships that I have, is that it instantly, when I interview or online, there's an instant connection
Mhm.
because we've shared that. And I find that the more I just thought that people would judge me or that it would just be I would have more shame if I shared my story on the internet, but I think that being vulnerable actually gives people permission to be vulnerable and honest themselves.
1000%. And that's why everybody loves you.
Oh, you're so kind.
I'm,
Thank you.
I'm speaking on behalf of the community. I'm a community
Oh,
representative, so
thank you. I just love people like I always joke, love people that can share their hot mess with me. And it just makes me feel like I can show up as my true self. And that is a very beautiful thing. So I asked, speaking of the internet, did you like that segue? Um,
Nice. Beautiful.
speaking of the internet, I asked this question on Instagram, and Andrea and I wanted to read a few of the responses. This person said that there's too much sleep, and this one is a big one for a lot of people. I don't experience it, but I know a lot of people do, is they're not taking care of their personal hygiene. A lot of people
Mm,
say that it seems like such a big deal to have a
yeah.
or even brush teeth or things like that. And that's hard to talk about because people, get embarrassed and such.
True. That's
Yeah.
true. And to that point, that could even be something as minor as I do my makeup most days, and maybe some days I just don't,
Yeah.
which is still totally fine, but it's
Yeah.
a change from my usual.
Yeah. Exactly. And this person said feeling trapped and hopeless, which I can absolutely relate to. Yes. This one said everyday tasks are impossible. And then this person was really interesting, I think, so self-aware, said they can tell their level of depression about how committed or not committed they are to recycling. She said it's a warning sign
Oh,
when it gets really bad, when she's just doesn't care and is throwing everything in the trash. And I thought, wow, what a way to be so self-aware of a little sign that
it sounds like recycling is something this person is passionate about, right? So that's in some ways like lack of interest in something that you normally care about. So again, change from baseline and also lack of interest or pleasure. That makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
yeah. And then I love this explanation where they said it's like walking through a dark labyrinth. I was like, ooh,
Wow.
that hits.
Oh,
I think one person also said staring into space a lot. Like they
hmm.
just stare into space and can't engage in anything. So I thought that was really interesting. Wanting to get things over with, I felt that for sure. And then me, it's the extra guilt of feeling guilty that I want it to be over with, right?
Like the derivative.
Yeah. This one just says, wake up in tears. Oh,
Oh,
my friend. I know that when I was in my worst depression, I remember I'd wake up, it would hit me, and I would immediately close my eyes and try to go back to sleep. I
wow.
remember that. Yeah.
Right.
That's a
That's a really interesting one because that happens to me. Sometimes I know that it's getting bad if you experience the depression as soon as you wake up. It's not that you wake up, you encounter a stressor, you encounter something difficult, and then you experience depression. It's like you wake up before anything even happens, you experience depression, right?
yeah.
That's the clue.
Yeah. And this person said it's very clear is that she just wants to lay down, like just be
Mm.
horizontal. And yeah. And one person said they stop reading. So I thought that was really interesting. Imposter syndrome, someone feeling paralyzed and apathetic. And that's something too we're always see on TV and stuff. They're just so sad and not want to get out of bed. Sometimes people are just numb and
Yeah,
apathetic. They don't cry at all.
right.
But yeah, someone else said they want to beat the blank out of a bathroom stall or the car seat when they are in there. And
Yeah,
that
so
definitely speaks
irritability.
to the irritability. What responses do you have?
Let's see here. Okay, so this person, this resonates with me. Isolation and withdrawal,
Mm.
plus no motivation to exercise.
Oh,
Yeah, definitely. That's so hard because exercise for me helps so much with my feelings of depression. But when you are experiencing depression, when it's gotten to that point, you don't want to do it anymore. So that's double-edged sword there.
yeah.
Uh, this other person said, for me, it's oversleeping and feeling full of fear and panic about all that needs done because you have no confidence in your brain that you can handle anything. I
Yes.
also avoid people in general as life feels too much.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, this person hit the nail on the head with the diagnostic criteria. Little pleasure doing things or lack of emotions.
Mm.
My warning signs are having concentration issues. Okay, that's a diagnostic one. Wanting to sleep more after I just woke up and had enough sleep. Another diagnostic one. Wanting to eat more. Another diagnostic.
Yeah.
Low energy socially and physically. Socially and
Yeah.
physically low energy. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. Low energy socially. Yeah. That is a really good way to put it.
We're seeing a theme here about withdrawal and lack of social bandwidth.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I love the ones that got really specific. It shows a lot of self-awareness.
Exactly.
But
So important.
I
Wait, I got
think,
one more. I got one more.
oh, you got one more. I want to hear
I got
it.
one more. The sad and mad at the same time for sure, along with imposter syndrome because I was recently diagnosed.
Yeah. Yeah. Imposter syndrome. Ugh, that's a hard one. That's a hard one for sure. I am so tempted to get into the things that help, but that is the next episode. So before we go, what words of encouragement could you give someone right now that is in the depths of a depression?
I have a fidget ring. Gee, I wish I were wearing it. It's got a little spinny thing, right? Fidget ring.
Mm.
And it says, "This too shall pass." And I know part of the problem with depression is that it makes it seem like it's forever. And it might legitimately be a very long time,
Yeah.
but it is not forever. It will pass. Whether that's because it passes on its own or you're doing something to make it pass, I encourage you to keep doing the things that you think will make it pass, doing the therapy, seeing the doctor, doing the exercise, whatever it is you've come up with your treatment team that helps you or that you know
Yeah.
helps you. It will pass. It is not forever. That belief that it is forever is a lie depression is telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true. And I love that you brought up the length because I try to say I don't know when or how,
Mhm.
right? Because it acknowledges that it's so hard, but it might take a really long time. And that's the worst feeling, but it's the truth, right? Yeah. Yeah.
About you, what would you say to someone?
I think I would say to someone, it's not your fault.
Oh,
I think
nice.
that's what I would have wanted to hear, that one, you're not alone in this, because I always felt like everyone else was fine and I was not. But yeah, basically, like, it's not your fault, that these are actually symptoms. This isn't who you are. It doesn't define you. You're not
Yes,
a bad person, right?
right. And to that end, I also am really conscious about my language. I
Mhm.
actually try not to say I'm depressed or she's depressed. I try to say I'm experiencing depression
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it puts a little distance between me and the experience, right?
Yeah.
I'm not depressed. This is not me. This is not who I am. It's not
Yeah.
indicative of my person, right? I'm experiencing this. It's transient.
Yeah. And then sometimes too, I'll share with people, like, I'll use the word symptom instead of just I am. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you. I love being here with you. Nowhere else I'd rather be.
I just find it so helpful to talk to someone that understands. I feel like a, a little bit of some of the shame that I hold on to, or a little bit, it feels a little bit comforting to past Shaley. And so I thank you for that. I hope that others know that they're not alone. Both Andrea and I are completely open to getting messages on Instagram and other places. Instagram's a really beautiful place, and online's a really beautiful place, because you have a little bit of distance and you can have a little bit of anonymity, hard word for me, and maybe you aren't telling people in your actual life, but you can show up online. And so we both have beautiful spaces and communities. So we hope to see you there, and we hope that you come back for the next episode, where we're going to talk about our tips and tricks, things that make it worse and things that can make it a little bit better. And
Easier.
yeah, a little bit easier. And I think that we're going to be real about it. We're going to tell you it's not going to miraculously fix
Right.
things, but there are things that we have learned in all our years of experiencing.
If anybody's telling you there's a cure or a quick fix, they're probably trying to sell you something, but we will be back with the real things that can actually make your life easier and lessen your suffering, at least in our experience.
Yes. Yes. Thank you again. You are my favorite.
Bye everybody.
This is Bipolar. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find video versions of This is Bipolar on our YouTube channel. We also have all our previous episodes of the podcast on Apple, Podbean, Spotify, and Google Play. We spend most of our time on Instagram at this.is.bipolar. There is a vibrant community there where we have conversations and post different ideas and different strategies, and we'd just love for you to join us there. It is so helpful if you enjoy our work or think it would be helpful to someone if you could like and share and save and follow us in all or any of those spaces. If you're a listener for the podcast, if you could leave a review, we would be forever grateful. Again, thank you for being here with us. Let's get the word out. Let's share lived experiences so that we can change the ideas that people have about bipolar and help those of us that live with it feel less alone. This is Bipolar.